He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Aaron Smale and I'm a journalist. Welcome to the Stolen Children of Aotearoa podcast. This podcast was made with the support of New Zealand On Air, Te Māngai Pāho and Whakaata Māori. It contains descriptions of the abuse of children, both physical and sexual, suicide, racism and strong language, so please take care. Part 3, Speaking Out. This story is about Albie and April and his brothers Rob and Jason, and his former partner, April Mokomoko. This is their story, from their point of view, a story they want told. It also rests on years of reporting that I've done into this issue and the 6-year Royal Commission of Inquiry into abuse and care.
Our parents come down this way to be away from that gang stuff. I suppose to have us kids probably have a better life for us, I suppose.
It's about how they were taken by the state from their whānau as children and stuck in social welfare institutions.
You witness stuff that's happening to girls, but you can't do anything about it and you want to survive.
This became their entry point into gangs and prison.
It's like jail, you either with a crew or you ain't, you're nobody.
But they weren't the only ones. Thousands of children, particularly Māori children, were incarcerated in state institutions, and the abuse they suffered there has followed them throughout their lives. Many of them ended up in gangs too, and this part of their story has largely been hidden from the public's view for decades. But Albie put it out there. The first time I met Albie was over lunch at a marae near Featherston in 2017. It wasn't long into the conversation that he said he'd gone to Kohitere Boys Training Centre, a welfare institution on the outskirts of Levin, the town where I live. But would he speak about it on the record, on camera? I floated the idea, and to my surprise, he was willing. We sat down in the car park of the marae, set up a camera, and talked. You've already heard a lot of what Albie had to say in episode 1, but this is where the conversation started.
Camera so I can remember. Oh, yeah. So it's Albie, how's that spelled?
My last name or my first name?
Oh, your first name. So it's Albie.
Yeah, Albie. Yeah, I usually Albie.
Yeah. And
my last name is April.
April?
Yeah, E-P-E-R-E.
So can you just kind of run through how you ended up going to the Kohitere first, or was that later?
Later. I ended up in Lookout Point Boys Home. The amount of abuse that got perpetrated on us, that was dished out to us was horrendous, actually, I guess for me, it just gave me a platform for when I got older, that violence was okay to do.
The video of the interview and the story that ran with it got a huge public reaction. But just as importantly, it opened up a conversation among gang members themselves. What they all knew, they started talking about. Albie had created a space for a public conversation. He'd broken through a silence that had been imposed on victims as children, and they ended up imposing on themselves as adults. Other media did follow-up stories. Albie's interview had started something. Gang members and others who had been through the state welfare institutions started talking more about it amongst themselves. Some had wanted to go public before, but couldn't face talking about what had happened to them. Albie's partner April also spoke up.
Even when Albert first did the interview, I was like, babe, what are you doing? Although it was really awesome, I still had to seek permission from my brothers to say something in case I talk about your own shit,
There was a lot of feedback about the first interview that I did. Not only a lot of feedback, a lot of thank yous. I didn't know other people had been pushing for it. I did not know. But people had been out there long before I'd been out there talking about it.
The story also added to the momentum that had been created by an earlier story I'd written with survivor Jimmy McLaughlin. The Human Rights Commission supported a protest in 2017 to deliver a petition to the government, calling for an independent inquiry into abuse in state-run welfare institutions.
More than 100 former wards of the state gathered at Parliament today calling for a full government inquiry into the abuse they suffered whilst in state care. The Human Rights Commissioner, Dame Susan DuBois, handed over a petition and an open letter demanding an inquiry and an apology for abuse suffered in care.
Successive governments had been resisting calls for an inquiry for decades. Albie and April came up from Dunedin for the protests and spoke on the steps of Parliament.
One by one they arrived, cradling their childhood photos in their arms. It's not known how many suffered sexual, physical and psychological abuse, but these people say they are all victims. One after another, they shared their stories.
The calls for an inquiry were to try and understand what had happened and why. A book by criminologist Elizabeth Stanley put the number of children that had been taken into custody at over 100,000. Many of them had begun speaking out about the abuse they had experienced. What had happened to them? Who was responsible? Were we still doing the same thing today? And what needed to change?
Now, how did I get up there? The squash player, Susan DuBois, very famous lady, and she got a hold of me and asked if I would like to go up there and help present the petition. Sort of overwhelmed about the situation, go to Parliament to hand a petition over.
In that first interview in the Marae car park, Albie drew a direct link between the violence of the state welfare institutions and gangs.
And these are these things that we learnt when we were younger, how to take a hiding and how to give a hiding. I could probably say that most gang members now either went through those places and are still gang members now or were gang members.
Appearing and talking in public about what had happened gave survivors a sense of being heard for the first time. It contradicted the argument by some people in government that an inquiry wasn't needed.
Because you got up on the day and spoke quite powerfully, I might add. Did it feel empowered?
Somebody believed me. I was actually believed. That made me feel more passionate to push on and maybe be a part of the redress.
That protest and victims speaking out led to a Royal Commission of Inquiry, which was announced by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in 2018.
Today, we are announcing that the inquiry into historic abuse in state care will be a Royal Commission.
That inquiry was initially into the abuse in state care between 1950 and 1999. I actually really don't like using the word care. Care implies they were looked after and protected. But in many of these institutions, they suffered abuse instead. I prefer using the word custody. They were taken away from the custody of their parents and put in the custody of the state. Custody also implies incarceration, which was what was happening. The scope of the inquiry was later expanded to include abuse in the care of church institutions. The Commission had the discretion to look into events that happened after 1999.
Honestly, I was quite ecstatic about it, really. My hopes were that the Royal Commission would bring out what was actually going on for us in there, the truth. When I done my interview with you is when I started thinking about things. And I not long finished a big leg. I think I finished doing it 7 years then. I actually wanted to stop going to jail before that last leg, because I actually realised that it's wasted space and wasted time. I've been to jail twice in the last 10 years, which is not too bad. Prior to that, it was every year before then. And that's from me getting older, I suppose, and actually sitting back and looking at things and thinking about them.
Albie's brother Rob says Albie speaking up changed everything.
I honestly believe that if my brother wasn't involved with the petition for our Royal Commission, I don't think anything would have changed for us. And I think at the time I was doing a prison sentence, and I refused to do their programs in their prison system because they don't fucking work. We've been going to jail for so many years, and all they've done to the programs is just change the names, add, altered and deleted. I guess while my brother was in the midst of doing his mahi with the Royal Commission, I decided to do ACC counselling and address my issues. Things started changing when I looked at my past and got some sort of understanding of what's been happening to us. Statistically, they tell us that it takes us 30 to 35 years for men to come out with their abuse. It was nearly 35 years when we came out with it.
Many gang members were still reluctant to talk openly about what had happened to them, particularly in front of people they had no reason to trust. But the inquiry created a space for those who saw the value of being heard to put their experiences on the record. It also caused many to reflect on how to heal and change.
What Albert has helped us all to do is do something about it. I was surprised, beautifully surprised, about how many people in our whānau talk about this stuff. And not only talking, like when you have the conversation, you're just happening, oh, what can we do what is it we need to do?
Well, everything you got to carry, when it pops in your head, everything's distorted. But now, because I'm not trying to escape from it, because I think I'm maybe more in touch with it. You know, I don't have to escape so much. My mind is a bit more clearer and can deal with it a bit better than when you're a young fella. I have a bit of a policy down here that it's best not to go to prison. I try to get them to look at having options. When we're talking about our young bros here, we've got to learn how to nourish and nurture them so that they benefit. We need to educate them. We need to get them employed to what they want to do, what they've dreamed about that we never got the chance to, and guide them the best way that we can. We don't want them going through the same stuff that we've gone through. It's like you look back on it and you keep studying it, just going over it. I suppose where you can make things a little bit better than what they were by tweaking things that didn't work, whatever they may be. It's having the resources out there for our families, trying to provide work for them. I believe work, it just changes everything. My father used to talk about it all the time. You know, go to work, earn a thing. Well, it wasn't until I actually went to work and started doing that you get a sense of belonging, sense of ownership. I did IPS training, which is International Peer Support, and we were qualified as facilitators, not only in sexual abuse, but it covers a whole area of things. Having that skill there is that we have a service available if we have those survivors that need that ongoing support.
We have young fellas that will come to us and, you know, not being aware of what they're actually coming for and what they're going to receive, you know.
These conversations would often lead back to their brother Raymond, who was always looking out for others.
Definitely looked up to the older brother, very family orientated, done a lot in the community. He used to volunteer himself and go to the school out there and teach all the kids kapahaka. I know that he took their classes to competitions. For me, that was something different, something new. It was one of the reasons I got up and said what I said. Speaking out, I suppose, was on behalf of my brother.
As well as losing his brother, Albie and April also lost their daughter.
My oldest girl, she passed away suicide. That was a few years ago now.
A week before my girl took her life, Sip said no to her. You can't look after your baby. My girl was, she had some stuff happen to her too. And she liked to drink and drug, and she had lots of problems, and she used to tell me and her father she was only half here. There was a smorgasbord on my girl's life table, and any one of those things could have tripped her. I will take some of that blame as her mama, I do. I could have had a bit more skill to do better with my girl, yep. I take some of that blame, and that's okay.
In the time that I've known Albie and April, I've seen them constantly trying to undo the damage that was done to them as children. That legacy of trauma has also impacted their children and grandchildren. The struggle is ongoing, but so is their hope for something different for the future.
For me now, it's about undoing what I learnt to make me a better person. I had 7 kids, I've got 18 grandchildren, and like for me, for now, it's not about me now. It's about what I leave behind. And if I carry on what I'm doing now, like all my old stuff of what I used to do, then I'm not going to leave them much. I don't want them going down the path I had, because it only leads to violence and destruction.
The Royal Commission's inquiry stretched out to 5 years. It heard from 2,400 victims and examined thousands of government documents that had not been publicly exposed before. The final report was delivered in July 2024 and tabled in Parliament. MPs from across the House responded to what the inquiry revealed, beginning with the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon.
Mr Speaker, this is a day that many New Zealanders who were abused in state care never thought would come. It's the day that this Parliament accepts with deep sorrow and regret the report of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care. At the heart of this report are the stories of 2,400 survivors, many of whom are here today. To every person who took part, I say thank you for your exceptional strength, your incredible courage, and your confronting honesty. Because of you, we know the truth about the abuse and the trauma that you endured. I cannot take away your pain, but I can tell you this: you are heard and you are believed. The state was supposed to care for you, but instead many of you were subjected to the most horrendous physical, emotional, mental and sexual abuse. And not only did this have a devastating impact on your life, but also your families and your communities. And I will never lose sight of what you have endured to bring the truth to life.
When these children would rightfully lash out or react to the abuse by trying to run away or misbehaving, their abusers would use that as evidence against them to justify locking them up, further mistreating or punishing them, and using the behaviour to discredit these children as not trustworthy and able to be ignored.
We must acknowledge that the shameful history of abuse in state care has led to prisons overflowing with some of the survivors of that abuse. Gangs contain survivors of that abuse.
We are here to work with survivors and across the aisle to ensure that this inquiry tabled today represents the first step in a story of restorative justice. For at the end of the day, what is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It is people, it is people, it is people.
So we will not stop until the last of our breath goes out. And I can sit here and I can say that this place stops creating harm for not just our people, but all of our people and all of our mokopuna. Kia kaha whānau.
When I hear comments like, you know, we thought this was a great country, we never could possibly do this, it's such a privileged statement. Māori, for way too long, have absolutely felt the distaste, the horror of what Pākehā systemic racism hands to us. It is not a surprise to Māori at all that these things occurred then and that they occur right now.
But I've got to ask, does the government really understand what the state's abuse of children led to when those children became adults? One of the volumes of the final report was entirely focused on hokio and kohitere and the role of the state in creating gangs and criminals. At a press conference, I asked Prime Minister Christopher Luxon if the findings of that volume would make the government pause and reconsider its punitive policies on gangs and crime.
Well, look, I understand many gang members have come from very dysfunctional upbringings. I get that. But also we can't have gang members causing pain and suffering.
You haven't answered my question. There's a volume on the connection between wealthy homes and gangs. Can you
I've read that.
speak to that?
Yes, I have read that, and I understand that. What I'd say to you is we're making sure we're increasing rehabilitation services in our corrections department, as you saw in the last budget, to actually make sure that people make the change they need to make.
But maybe it's the Crown that needs to make changes. It was the Crown that inflicted violence and trauma on hundreds of thousands of children. Many of them then went on to join gangs or end up in prison. The Royal Commission report estimated that between 1950 and 2019, up to 200,000 people were abused in the custody of state and faith-based institutions. Most of those were children, and the majority of those children were Māori, in many places up to 80%. The report said, once in care, Māori survivors experienced harsher treatment across many settings, being degraded because of their ethnicity and skin colour. Going by the report's numbers, the Crown has caused more suffering and pain than any gang, and it is the Crown that has deliberately covered up the extent of its abuse of children for decades. The harm this has caused, including gangs, has been allowed to fester while politicians ignore the state's role in creating that harm. The Royal Commission stated in its report that political and public service leaders spent time, energy, and taxpayer resources to hide, cover up, and then legally fight survivors to protect the potential perceived costs to the Crown and their own reputations. Who is being held accountable for that? Currently no one. Some of the people who covered up the Crown's crimes are still in high-level positions within Crown agencies. Their names are buried in the footnotes of the Royal Commission's reports, but sometimes they're named directly. The current government wants to take patches off gang members, but that won't take away the trauma that led to that person joining a gang in the first place. It wants to put kids in boot camps. But for many, those boot camps have too many echoes of the welfare homes that came before them. I pressed the Prime Minister on whether he could see the connection between welfare homes and gangs, but I didn't really get a clear answer.
I understand gangs today cause pain and suffering to their fellow citizens as well.
Cause pain and suffering
Sure,
to them.
yes, and that's why we'll have redress between now and we'll continue to work through the redress scenarios. But we also have to work on the long-term challenges that cause people to join gangs.
The Commission's final report is a huge document. It's 16 volumes. And when I opened the folder on my computer, I spotted that one of them was a case study on Hokio and Kohitere, titled A Cauldron of Violence. The subtitle was A Case Study of the State's Role in Creating Gangs and Criminals. The Royal Commission's report said Hokio School and Kohitere Centre were not places of care. The state removed children and young people from their families and sent them to institutions where abuse of power, violence, and racism were normalised. Survivors were brutally punished and blamed for behaviours often caused by trauma, learning difficulties, disabilities, and by the very abuse they endured. Abuse in Hokio School and Kohitere Centre was systemic. From the top down, there was little oversight or accountability. The report continues. The abuse they experienced has led to spiritual, physical, psychological, relationship, and intergenerational impacts. Some survivors have spent most of their lives in jail or sought connection and support through gang membership with others who share similar experiences of abuse and care. Reading this volume in particular backed up everything Albie and his brothers Rob and Jason and his former partner April had been telling me. It's what dozens of others had told me, and it's what thousands had told the Royal Commission, that the state inflicted horrendous violence on them when they were children, and the trauma of that has followed them throughout their lives. And the Crown is a recidivist criminal offender. The Independent Children's Monitor found that in 2023, there were 519 children abused in the custody of the state. Most of those children were abused more than once. Where's the accountability for that? So the state continues to abuse children in its custody. That one conversation with Albie in a marae car park near Featherston led to multiple conversations. And now the Royal Commission report has sparked a long overdue national conversation about how we respond to children and their whānau who are vulnerable or marginalised. The victims have finally been heard, seen and believed. But will we listen? I spoke to Albie the day the Royal Commission's final report was tabled in Parliament.
It's just one conversation in a bloody car park in Featherston.
How long ago was it?
7 years ago now.
7 years ago? Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I just thought it was time.
I think
That's probably why it came out so easy.
Yeah.
I hope survivors get what they
deserve,
need
yeah.
and want.
How many moko have you got?
20 odd.
What do you want for them?
I definitely want them to have a better life than what I had.
Albie's decision to talk publicly might not have happened. After we spoke in the marae car park that day, Albie had second thoughts. He was going to call me and pull out. In fact, he's still nervous about this podcast. But as he was getting cold feet, the story was already out, and he started getting flooded with positive feedback. For so many years, Albie and his brothers used their fists to communicate, because that's what they'd been taught by the state. But the state had also taught them to shut up, to be quiet, to not talk. It ingrained it in thousands of children that they were to be quiet, that no one was listening, and no one would believe them. The abusers used that silence to hide what they'd done. The Crown has perpetuated that silence for decades, as politicians, bureaucrats and lawyers found ways to hide the extent of the state's abuse of children from the public. By doing so, they failed to recognise and acknowledge the trauma that was inflicted on tens of thousands of children. Many of those children became gang members. In the public mind, gang members are not usually associated with being victims, or vulnerable, or in need of being heard. But despite their appearance, many are. On that day in Featherston, I spoke to another senior gang member who was distraught at being reminded of what had happened to him. He had wagged school for one day when he was 10, and his father had found out and wasn't happy about this. He'd taken him to the police to give him a fright, expecting the police to bring him home. They didn't. They sent him to a welfare home, and he spent 4 years in different state institutions where he suffered abuse like thousands of others. When I spoke to him, at one point he said to me, "What did I do to deserve that?" All I could say was absolutely nothing. He couldn't talk on the record. It was too painful. In another conversation I had later, he told me he'd take what had happened to him to the grave. And he did. But I do know that he was grateful to Albie for speaking out, for breaking the silence that had been inflicted on him and many others. I'm grateful to Albie too, and so are thousands of others. Many thanks to April, Albie, Rob and Jason for sharing their stories. This podcast accompanies a feature-length documentary, also called The Stolen Children of Aotearoa, which is available on Whakaata Māori at maoriplus.co.nz. I hosted and researched this podcast, and the script was written by myself and Ruth Corver. This podcast was edited by Bridget Lyon, with audio engineering by Phil Burton. It was produced by Ruth Corver for Awa Films, and executive produced by Julian and Bex Arahanga. I'd like to thank the RNZ team of William Ray, Tim Watkin, Tim Burnell, and Yana Tanahu Owen, and acknowledge the originating commissioner, Kay Elmers. This podcast was made with the support of New Zealand On Air, Te Māngai Paho and Whakaata Māori.